It's been 40 years since the incredible raid on Entebbe, when a whole lot of Israelis who had been captured, who had been hijacked and had been taken to Entebbe, were rescued in a very daring raid by the Israeli army. It is perhaps held today as one of the greatest rescues of hostages of all time. And it's true that some hostages did die. And of course, the leader of the mission, Yonatan Netanyahu, the brother of the current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. But by and large, it was an incredible, successful mission. And it showed the extent to which the Jewish people were willing to go to save hostages. And this is something that we see in this week's parasha, Parashat Chukat, where the Torah tells us that a particular nation attacked the Jewish people, Vayish mimenu shevi, and they took a captive. One captive, says the Talmud. In fact, it was a maidservant. And yet the entire Jewish people took a vow that they were going to go out to war, and that if they were successful, they would take all of the booty and they would pledge it to God. They would not use it for themselves whatsoever. They did this all just to rescue a single captive. And then throughout Jewish history, we have seen how particular Jews have been to try to make sure that those who were held in enemy clutches were in some ways redeemed. And unfortunately, this is an ongoing story. We've seen it in recent times with Israeli soldiers who were captured by Palestinians, by terrorists, and held sometimes for many, many years. Sometimes their whereabouts remains unknown to this very day. It's a terrible thing, and it's something that drives and motivates the Jewish heart to go out and to rescue captives. But let's take it a step further. It's true that here the Torah is speaking about an actual physical captive, somebody who was taken hostage. But the Talmud speaks about another type of a captives, Tinok shenishba lebein hagoyim. It would happen in the ancient world that sometimes the Jewish people were conquered, sometimes there was some type of an army that would come into Israel, and they would capture children. They would capture little children, babies sometimes. They would take them back to wherever they had come from, and they would raise them there, and they would raise them as Gentiles. And this type of a person was known as a Tinok shenishba lebein hagoyim, a little child who had been captured and raised amongst Gentiles. The child had no idea that he or she was Jewish. They knew nothing about Judaism whatsoever. And then later on in their lives, they realize that they're Jewish, but they know nothing about Judaism. And they've been living as a Gentile. How do we approach such people? And already the Rambam writes about this in his famous code. There he's speaking about the descendants of the Karaites. The Karaites was a sect of Jews. They exist today, but very, very marginal. And they were a sect of Jews that didn't believe in the oral law, and they separated themselves from the rest of the Jewish community. When the Rambam came to Egypt, he found there was a whole Karaite community, but by and large, they were very ignorant. They were just doing what their forefathers had done. No one had really educated them in what it means to be a Karaite, or even what it means to be Jewish. And the Rambam says that we shouldn't consider such people as apostates, as heretics. On the contrary, we should go to them with love, with compassion, with peace, because he says they are no different to that non-Jewish child, to that Jewish child who was captured and raised amongst the Gentiles. And therefore we should bring them back. In our day too, many of the greatest halachic authorities, including the Chazon Ish, who passed away in the 50s, came out with just such a ruling. That secular Jews in our time, even those who were raised in a Jewish family, are to be considered like Jews who were captured and raised amongst Gentiles. They know absolutely nothing about Judaism. And rather than looking down upon them and criticizing them and saying how irreligious they are, we should reach out to them with love. Because although they're not a physical captive, they are a spiritual captive of the outside world, of foreign influences and foreign values. And therefore we must do our utmost to rescue them. So just as in the Torah Parsha, we learnt the commitment with which the Jewish people went to rescue that physical captive, or as we saw 40 years ago, the commitment with which they went to rescue those captives who were being held by the hijackers in Entebbe, so too, it's the mission of each and every Jew, and especially those who know more, to reach out to the spiritual captives and bring them back to the bosom of their people. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.